Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Ladies and gents, just before I do a formal welcome, just on behalf of the college, I have to read out a health and safety notice. It's delighted to see such a packed hall, so please do listen to this notice just in case we need it, which no doubt we won't. So there are no fires or emergency drills planned for this evening. So if you do hear a fire alarm, Jerry Carlisle, fastest man in the room, follow him out the door and make your way out, just the exits that we come in, out into the front car park. Please don't leave anything in the hall, or if you do not come back to try and get it until St Mary's staff allows back into the hall. The event is a non-smoking event and a non-smoking college, so please, again, if you need to take a cigarette break, please go outside the main doors to do that. Somebody has written down here there's 7 defibrillators to be found around the college. Hopefully we do not need to use one of those this evening, but again, just in case of an emergency, the college is well backed up in that instance. So Carja, just while I'm mar Stuart feeling phobal, Falcha Amwar, occur as Scafja and Shaw and Shaw and Imak Jernak of Estogin and you of some Lena or Lynn Feile Traha. This is the last event, folks, of our 30th anniversary year, and what a year it's been for Feeling Phobal. We set out in July 2017 to plan the biggest programme of events that the festival in West Belfast has seen. And along with our 3 festivals, we tried to plan a significant event every month of the year. And we're delighted to finish the year in December and the lead up to Christmas with such a crowd here this evening. Earlier on, we came into the room, we'd only about 100 seats set out, and we've had to set out another 250. So that just shows you the popularity of the man who we're going to welcome this evening, and obviously the topic that we're going to be talking about this evening. But before I do introduce our guests, I would like to pay a special thanks to yourselves, the crowds who come to Feile year on year, event after event, to all the staff and volunteers and subcommittees who make Feile what it is. It's those people who spend untold hours planning events like this for audiences as big as this, and our sponsors and funders who, again, without their support, we wouldn't be able to put events like this on. So thank you very much for everyone who has come here this evening. We're delighted, first of all, to welcome, again, a fellow who is no stranger to Feile, BBC Talkback presenter William Crawley, who has agreed to facilitate this evening's conversation. We're obviously delighted to welcome Ireland's leading economist, David McWilliams, who again is no stranger to Feile, having been here a number of years ago. David is an authority on the Irish economy, and his views on Brexit and a united Ireland are particularly relevant at this time. As well as a facilitate discussion, which will probably last around 40-45 minutes, William's is also going to facilitate a Q&A with yourself. So these events work when the audience participates, so please do participate. And as we know, West Belfast are never a quiet crowd, so ask the questions and get involved in the event. And as well as that, most people in the room will probably know that David is a very popular author and has had 4 bestsellers already. And we're delighted that he has chosen West Belfast and chosen Feile to host his book launch here this evening. And after the Q&A, David is happy to stay behind, sign books, which are up at the back of the hall, and Carrie Poley from the Culture will be selling them for us. So we're going to have bouncers in the back door. You're not allowed to leave the room unless you buy a book for Christmas. David told us to say that. But folks, the night is yours, so please participate in the event, get involved. And on behalf of Feeling Phobal, thank you for participating in a fantastic 2018 and Nulla Conna that I continue. So,
How are you all doing tonight? My name is William Crawley. It's my great pleasure to be here in St Mary's. And in this educational context, I was just thinking as we're coming in of that old mantra of education that you have to understand deeply in order to communicate simply. And as you're just about to find out, our guest tonight is a superb communicator. Now, there are some great thinkers who are poor communicators. And there are some poor thinkers who are great. And those are the ones to watch, by the way. Turn the TV news on any night of the week. Watch it across the world. But our guest tonight is a great thinker who's also a great communicator. Give a great West Belfast vulture to David McWilliams.
To be here, and Celtic are playing tonight. Look at that crowd. I'm telling you, if you can have gun Celtic and West Belfast, you're doing well.
We're going to go for a cost-benefit analysis of that. Can we get the pronunciation correct first of all? You go for Renaissance or Renaissance?
Renaissance with the South Dublin, father on the thing.
Renaissance Nation, which is the latest book. You're showing off now. What is this? Like 6 bestsellers?
It's the 5th. Yeah.
It's the 6th. I counted. There's 6.
Yeah.
You've forgotten one.
That's true.
So this is the story. You've used in the subtitle how the Pope's children rewrote the rules for Ireland, picking up at a previous book, That Generation Born in 1979, and the 40 years since, coming up to the anniversary, how this place has been absolutely transformed socially and economically. Now, what's interesting in the book is that you take on the most common explanation for that within Ireland and say that's wrong and offer your own explanation. Tell us your explanation.
Thank you very much, William. Again, it is really lovely to be here in West Belfast. The book comes from a book I wrote a couple of years ago called The Pope's Children, which was about the generation that was born in 1979. I was young. My sisters went along to see the Pope. It was a big deal in our neck of the woods. And what was really interesting for me was that the Irish baby boom peaked 9 months to the day after the Pope kissed the tarmac in Dublin. So Irish people fornicated en masse in response to the Pope. And I found this very interesting. After Mass, exactly. And I was working in the Central Bank of Ireland, and my boss had asked me to go and look at population dynamics, and I saw this and I thought, what the hell's going on here? So that I thought there's something very interesting about this generation. And then I decided to look at the 40 years history. And what is extraordinary is the Republic of Ireland has gone through an amazing transformation, a really amazing transformation, economic, socially, emotionally, psychologically. And sometimes we don't get that in Ireland. Sometimes we don't see how amazing the transformation has been. And the aim of the book was to A, identify the transformation, B, put it into the context of other countries. And what I mean by that is saying that no other country in Europe has grown anywhere like Ireland. No other country has been transformed anywhere like Ireland in the same period. And the only countries that have actually had certain economic indicators close to Ireland are Asian countries that we all know about. So I thought that was quite interesting. And then the third thing that struck me was the economic link between economic agility and liberalism, tolerance and openness. Because what has never really been identified is, why do countries grow? Why do they grow? And they grow because individuals take commercial risks. And why do people take commercial risks? And then it struck me that there's a connection between liberalism and economic self-expression. And then I looked back at history and I saw this happened particularly in Holland in the late 16th century. And every country that has embraced openness and tolerance and dignity and given rights to minority groups, dignified minority groups, has embraced people who are not necessarily in the mainstream, has in a way changed the relationship between church and state, which is so important in Ireland. What you find is also a dynamism that's generated by that liberation, and it comes through in economics. So the idea in the book is that what actually drives the economy is something I've always felt, is that economics is nothing more than human behavior. That when we talk about the economy, it's really funny, your economists get up and they say, oh, economics is about maths and statistics. It's not. The economy is nothing more than every decision that you take every day at the kitchen table, in the car, at work. Should I buy? Should I not buy? Should I get educated? Should I not? Should I get a mortgage? Should all these things that everybody does all the time, William. That is the economy. And as a consequence, to understand how the economy moves backwards and forwards, we have to understand human nature. And us, the human individual.
And that means in that analysis you have, David, that this renaissance, this transformation is bubbling up.
It's bubbling up from bottom up. So
rather than top down, rather than imposed transformation.
And this is a very important point, is that it's from the bottom, that the V.S. Naipaul, the Indian writer, Trinidadian Indian, talked about India and the transformation of India, and he talked about it in the context of what he describes a beautiful expression. He said millions of little mutinies in people's heads, right? Imagine that idea. Everyone has expectations about their life. Every kid has a dream. You go into I come from a family of teachers, and my mother used to talk to me about kids in school, and every kid has a dream for themselves. But in your head, you have pressure from above not to imagine things, not to dream about things, not to see yourself as somebody who advances themselves and improves themselves. And Naipaul described the little mutinies going off in Indians' heads. And I think the same thing happened in Ireland, that basically everybody went through little mutinies. And we didn't realise that. The media didn't realise that. The political class didn't realise that until, for example, the repeal referendum in April. And I started writing the book the morning of the repeal. I'd come up with the idea, but I was trying to contextualise it. And during the repeal referendum, the media view was that basically Ireland was split 50-50 between liberals and conservatives, between traditionalists and individuals, or whatever you want to describe, between religious and non-religious. And then something really weird happened in the referendum, which was that my constituency, Dunleary, which has always been the most liberal, voted, for example, for abortion in 1983 and was very much on the outlier. My constituency voted the same way as Inishmaan. Now, Inishmaan is the most rural place. It's where Singh went to find the playboy of the Western world. And my son, God bless him, was sent to the Gaeltacht in Inishmaan. Right? He was 60, he still is 60 when he was 15, to knock some sense into him. And if anybody knows what Inishmaan is like in the winter, it makes Tory look like Majorca. Okay? And but what really interested me was how can a society change so dramatically? And then I started to look at all sorts of different indicators of social, economically, but much more important, emotional change. Yeah. And what struck me was that when you dignify people, and I use the word dignify, and when you dignify commercial endeavour, that idea that I am going to try and do something for myself, what happens is you give permission for these mutinies to express themselves in economics. We see it all over the world, but in Ireland, because we are wedded to the idea of the big man in history, we like to think that there's some sort of hydraulic person at the top that pulls levers and things happen. That's not how it works. It works from deep in our own souls.
And the big man in history in this story that you want to challenge, I guess, is Sean Lemass. Oh
yeah, well actually I'm always intrigued by Sean Lemass, the hagiography about Sean Lemass. Basically in the south, and to a degree in the north as well, but certainly the south, there is this narrative that Sean Lemass comes in the late 1950s, 500,000, it's amazing, Irish people emigrated to England alone in the 50s. I mean, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And Lemass comes in with Whittaker, a fellow from Rostrevor, not so far away from here, and the two of them construct this economic model, which is to open Ireland to outside investment, and hey presto, the society changes. But actually, if you look at the data, if you look at the numbers, that's not what happened at all. It's a really good story, and people like it because people like to think that the relationship with the big boss and the society is so direct. But actually, that's not what happened at all. For 30 years after that, the Irish economy went backwards still. And so something happened around 1990 which changed everything. So I prefer to look at the election of Mary Robinson, if you want to politicise it, as a much more interesting launchpad for the renaissance of the Republic, because the election of Mary Robinson, for me, and again I talked about somebody who voted for Mary Robinson, but for me was the inflection point where old Ireland changed and something new came in. And Robinson was new. First of all, she was a woman, right? Secondly, she was going up against the Fianna Fáil machine, and the Fianna Fáil party is an extremely effective machine, and it was certainly then an extremely effective machine. People didn't give her a hope, but the Irish people voted for her because, again, the little mutinies were going off. So my sense is that we have to look at liberal Ireland to see wealthy Ireland, that when we were illiberal, when we were dominated by the church, when we were dominated by ideology, when we were still coming out of the independence project, so to speak, So that's 70 years from 1922 to 1992. Nothing happened economically. And then something happened. Now the question is why. I believe the catalyst, so the torch was lit due to liberalism. People came back. I worked in England like most of my friends for a long time. We all came back in the late 90s. But also, obviously, education played a massive, massive part. And free education in the 1960s gave people the sense that they could do something. And there's a little riff in the book about the explosion of hurling in Dalkey, right? Dalkey is a very swanky part of South Dublin, where I'm from. When I was a kid, only mentors hurled, okay, in South Dublin. It was a rugby and soccer neck of the woods, okay? And really depended on what school you went to, whether it was soccer or rugby, but GAA was very small beer, usually driven by a couple of families, which you notice in all movements, it's usually a couple of families. And what really intrigued me on the day of the referendum was the other thing that was going on was this extraordinary mini All-Ireland in Coola GAA. Coola GAA, when I was a young fella, was a tiny, you didn't even know what happened in there. We played soccer beside us, I didn't know what happened in us. And it was hurling. And even more strange, Dalkey, the home of Coola, which is regarded as one of the, to use the parlance, most West British place in the south, okay, is the All-Ireland hurling club champion for the last 2 years. And the national school that produced most of the hurlers was the national school I went to. And when I went to national school, we didn't even hurl. So what I wanted to understand was what was happening socially to South Dublin. And what you see in South Dublin is the dramatic increase in professional classes of people whose parents were small farmers. This is the really interesting thing. So education, free education is introduced in the 60s. And the idea was that Ireland would follow the pattern of Britain, so that the urban working class in the south, who were excluded from education because it was expensive, would become very educated. What actually happened was the county, there was a very interesting research paper, so I said, who benefited most? And what you found was it wasn't like you'd expect as an economist that the most people with educated parents, or people with educated in the family, or people with money, they do well. What actually transpired was the county that did best out of free education in the whole of Ireland in the 1960s, 70s into the 80s and 90s were the counties with the highest percentage of very small farmers under 15 acres. So that's something that we never expected. And in actual fact, the micro-analysis shows that the county that did the best in Ireland, the most successful people in Ireland, are the sons and daughters of small farmers from East Galway. That's it. And East Galway is the home of hurling in Connacht. And those people became teachers, and their kids became doctors and lawyers and professionals and consultants, and it's their kids are playing hurling in deepest South Dublin. So what intrigues me is not just one reason for social change. It's all the reasons, and they're all...
Well, let's throw in some more. The European Union, free movement of people, the accession states, immigration, more generally.
Immigration has been the single... what is very interesting is, and I'm always intrigued about Brexit and the anti-immigrant sentiment, because immigration has been an overwhelming boom to the Irish economy. Without the immigrants, we would go backwards. People don't seem to ever equate the fact that the pie gets bigger. This is the beautiful thing about economics, right? Maybe sometimes they say, well, the pie is that big, and if all the immigrants come in, I'll get less of it. That's not how it works, is that economics is a dynamic, okay?
It's an inflatable pie.
It's an inflatable, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the interesting thing is, like GDP, you know that thing, it gets bigger and bigger every year. Wealth is created, because wealth is created in this most amazing machine, economic machine, called the human mind. That's where all creativity comes from, all economic creativity. So like for example, even today was a Polish taxi driver took me from Dundonald to the Falls Road, because none of you locals would do that trip. Right?
He isn't.
No, it's funny, I asked my mother-in-law from Dundonald, I said, I'm doing a gig over in Falls Road, would you like to come? And she goes, no, I would not. I go over there. So I'm running the gauntlet back home to Dundonald to report on what was seen and discovered over there. It's as if you don't breathe the same air or something. Anyway, so I've lived this life in the north all my life.
Because I tell them I'm Liam McGrathaway. It always works, always.
Anyway, so if you take that all human creativity comes from the human mind, it doesn't come from. Economists get things wrong. It's not about building factories and building buildings and counting them all up, and that's GDP. GDP, economic growth happens in here. And if you think about immigrants, almost everybody in this room has an immigrant brother or sister or uncle or granny or whatever, right? In the UK or in America or whatever. Well, I was an illegal dishwasher. My first job was an illegal dishwasher in Boston in late 1980s. And whereabouts? Joe's American Bar and Grill. So there was something about the patties and the dishwashing, right? But when you encourage people to come into the society, typically what you're getting is people who want to do well for themselves. And there's a beautiful alchemy of their ideas and their connections and their networks and our capital and our security or whatever you want to call it. And so, for example, now, it's really interesting you think about Brexit. The Republic of Ireland, per head of population, has more immigrants than the United Kingdom. 17% of our population are foreign born, okay? Why is there no anti-immigrant party? Why is there no even anti-immigrant TD? Why is there no even splinter group that is gaining any traction? So this is quite interesting. And this is again back to this idea of liberalism. That once you begin to embrace the gay community, once you begin to embrace people who felt outside, what you have is you create the environment for people to do their thing. And I say, when I was brought up, William, Ireland was very much a know your place society. Yeah. School teacher, the priest, whoever it happens to be, you, McWilliams, know your place because we know who your alpha was and his alpha before him, and this is your height, and you can go there. That's fine. Now I think we have what I call as a have-a-go society, and so what you see is that 71% of all Irish people are employed in small companies, small Irish companies. So you take out the civil service, which is 16%, and the multinationals, which is about 14%, and you see the real dynamism of the country is in small business. So in a way, what I wanted to do, William, was do something very unfashionable, which is to celebrate the ordinary in the book. Celebrate the ordinary individual, celebrate the person who people rarely talk about. Yeah. There's nothing heroic about it. They don't go over the barricades for these ideas. But when you have a society where the ordinary individual is getting on, doing his thing or her thing, you create something really special.
I guess it's what you call the radical centre.
Yes.
And the absence of a kind of a far-right populism.
Or far left.
Or far-left populism. The Casey phenomenon, I suppose, postdates the completion of the book, the Irexit.
Irexit has no hope in hell.
Isn't a movement?
No, it's a couple of geezers. It's a couple of geezers in a bad hotel, probably around the M50 somewhere, as we speak, watching Celtic. Thinking, no, I mean, the reason there is no appetite for this is because people in the Republic, people in Northern Ireland, understand what the European Union is about. And that comes from educating ourselves, from understanding what John Hume started, which I think was an extraordinary, very lonely road in the 1970s. What many of our politicians understood. I ended up going to, I'll just give you an example. I went to a place called the College of Europe to do a master's. And Ireland was a tiny country, and there were 9 Irish students there. And like 50 French and 50 Germans, there were 2 English students. So they haven't really engaged with the notion, ever. Yeah. And the European Union is part of the story. Multinationals are part of the story. Individual is part of the story. But what is really interesting is the sum of the parts is really quite impressive. And the thing about all Irish people is our mammies told us never to brag. Right. So you don't want to you're going to talk amongst yourselves like this. You Can't be talking to foreigners like this, right? But it's really quite an achievement, and we should really celebrate it. And it brings us to all sorts of discussions about the entire country.
We're going to get there, but the story you're telling is essentially a neoliberal globalist story, isn't it?
No, it's a liberal. It's a liberal. I think liberalism is the key here. Tolerance, acceptance, the dignification of what was previously regarded as beyond the pale. The primacy of the individual in terms of allowing people to love who they want to love, to live where they want to live, to do what they want to do, and not only encourage that, but offer it protection. And I think that we never in the South went out to do this, but that's the end game. So, I mean, it's quite interesting. In the Pope's Children book I wrote a couple of years ago, and I kind of suggested that these kids born in 1979 would change the country. And I described them as the new elite. And then something weird happened when I was reading the book. Because sometimes when you're doing these things, you have to come up with a strap line and hope that it all works. And what was interesting is then, in my own estimation, nothing sort of underscores, this is not a political endorsement, but it's more of an observation. The changed Ireland, from the one I grew up in the 1980s in particular, then having a Taoiseach who was gay, who was half Hindu, whose dad is an immigrant, and who is not only accepted by the country, but what we found really interesting in the South was when Varadkar was inaugurated, all the British press and the German press and the American press said, "Oh my God, this is really weird. Look at Ireland has changed." And nobody in the South gave a damn. And that is what real change is. Real change is when the abnormal appears normal. When what used to be regarded as beyond the pale is mainstream, and what was mainstream is redundant. That's real change. And when nobody even talks about it. And I think the change in Ireland is deeply rooted, and I think it's changed our DNA.
Okay, so that's the story in the Republic, let's put it that way, from the sort of isolationism that we may have seen in the past, the introvertedness of the past, the kind of constrictedness socially and morally of the past, to this. Put the border in there, put partition in there. Now describe, in that same period of time, what has happened north.
Well, obviously my engagement with the North is very personal, for a variety of reasons. But the main one is in 1994, having not been across the border very often, I ended up being the best man at a wedding in a small Presbyterian church called the Ballygilbert Presbyterian Church.
Oh, you know it, yeah.
Exactly, not so far from Bangor. And my mate came up here to work for UTV, and his name was Paddy Murphy. Okay, and Paddy Murphy marries the boss's daughter, and believe me, the boss was not happy. Okay, and so there was an avalanche of Fenians up for the wedding, right? And I was the best man, and they got married young, so we were in our early 20s, and the minister was not any old minister, but they just had to go a notch higher, and he was the moderator of the Presbyterian Church. And Murphy and I went out for a couple of scoops the night before, as did the lads, and we had a discussion with the minister at 11 a.m. on the morning of the do. And we walked into the church, and the minister, the moderator, very deep voice like this, produced the Bible. I said, "Where would you like to start?" And I looked at Murphy and I said, "I have no rash as well." And it became obvious that we were not people of the Bible. And that was okay until we got used to that. The wedding was at 3 o'clock, obviously, in the church. And obviously it's customary for the bride to be a wee bit late. But it's not customary for half the church to be a little bit late. And if you wanted to underscore the difference between Southerners and Northerners, the left-hand side of the church was full of bebonneted Methodists, Presbyterians, the odd Plymouth Brethren, granny thrown in. And I was up on the altar watching this, and there wasn't a sinner in the right-hand side. They were in the Cultraw Inn. Right? And just, this is before mobile phones, 1994. Okay? I had to get into the Presbyterian moderator's red Vauxhall Cavalier and hoover down to the Cultraw Inn to get the paddies out of the boozer. And at that particular wedding, the bridesmaid just couldn't stop laughing at these ridiculous, casual, messy Southerners. And then we got married. And we got married, and our children are really, as I said to you, they're kind of the Good Friday Agreement incarnate. They're little mutts, little mongrels. They don't know which foot they kick with at all, right? And that began my 25-year matriculation in this part of the world. So when I was writing the book, I thought what was very interesting to me was that so few Southern writers writing about economics and politics extend their analysis to the implication of all this for the North, for a variety of reasons, which we can all discuss later on. And I was doing a talk in Balahi. You told me the difference between Balahi and Balahi. Let's just say my mother-in-law's from Portlanone and she is Balahi.
That's all right.
I think she's a member of the 5th Presbyterian. I don't know what happened to the other 4, but something there.
They devoured each other.
They devoured each other, exactly. There was a scrap. There was a shortage. Anyway, and I was there and I was thinking to myself, Shan and I drove around. And it has always interested me because of my marriage, because of our family. Our family are split. We're very much a Belfast, Dublin family. What is going to happen here? What is likely to happen? And how are these economic developments that I see in the South going to impact on the tone, William, of the next discussion, the tone? And of course, Brexit, as we all know, has changed that discussion. So much so that even 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Financial Times asked me to write a piece about this. This is the first time the Financial Times has asked anybody to write anything, because the Financial Times is the newspaper of the establishment in the UK. And then I started to look at the demography, who's having babies, who isn't. Then I started looking at the massive, massive change in economics. And you asked me about partition. As an economist, something really interesting and something very definitive can be said, which is that if you look in 1921, 80% of the economic activity of this island was generated in the 3 counties around Belfast. 80%. Belfast was a bigger city by 1911 than Dublin. Population was greater and growing much faster. This part of the country was innovative, was wealthy, and seemed to be self-generative. It was generating very innovative people. And they were incredibly commercially successful. Like incredibly, almost like the Silicon Valley of Northern Europe, not just of this part of the world. And the South was rural, uneducated, and very poor. You fast forward 100 years to now, and the transformation is extraordinary. For example, the northern economy, so let's just look at the facts, the hard numbers, is a fraction of the South in terms of size, in terms of dynamism, in terms of growth. So for example, even if you look at any indicator, macroeconomic indicator, what this shows is one part of the country. It's a bit like a sort of an economic experiment. You've got the same country, 2 jurisdictions. So you've got more or less the same country, 2 jurisdictions. You start when one jurisdiction is much richer. You end when that jurisdiction, Northern Ireland, has an income per head of €22,000 on average, and the Republic of Ireland has an income per head, and we adjusted this for multinationals, of 38,000 euros. So the Republic of Ireland is 70% richer. So then you've got to say to yourself that partition from an economic perspective has been a calamity, economically, for nationalists and unionists, for Catholics and Protestants. And then you've got to go and look at the reasons for this. There are many, many reasons that we can talk about. But it also means that the narrative, which I think was accurate up until, let's say, the 1990s, certainly accurate in terms of data up until the 1950s, that the North was in some way a sophisticated economy and the South was not, has been turned on its head. So the implication, William, of that probably comes down to budget arithmetic in the eventuality of a new Ireland. There was always the case, articulated particularly from the South, that, in parenthesis, we couldn't afford the North. That's not the case anymore. So that changes certain dynamics. Not all, everything, but it changes everything. But then it struck me, and this is the interesting thing, is that sort of journey that the South went on of tolerance and liberalism and openness, could that happen here? Could it happen here? Will the demography allow it to happen here? You look at the demographics, it's extraordinary that the British census, which is taken every 10 years, the Irish census is taken every 5, both very detailed documents. They really tell you a lot about the society. In the British census, they break down the population all across the United Kingdom in cohorts of 10 years. So the population 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, etc., all the way up to the oldest people. And here in Northern Ireland, they do the same thing. And they break it down in religious affiliation. And what you see in the population over 90 in Northern Ireland, which is 14,000 people left over 90, is that it's about 70% Protestant, 30% Catholic, which is more or less the status quo at partition. That was more or less what Northern Ireland's division was. If you look at the population under 5 or under 10, you see an extraordinary and dramatic reversion. So the Catholic population that was actually 29% has gone up to 46%. The Protestant population that was 70 has gone down to 35. And in the middle you have the non-affiliated, which is the sort of the ground to play for politically. These are the people. Okay. But you also see that if those trends continue, the Catholic population will be in the majority within a decade, or not a decade, at least a decade and a half. The voting majority. So that totally changes the dynamic.
No, of course, that may not translate into...
It might, no, absolutely, but I'm just saying, because I'm no expert, I'm just married. Okay?
You're married to an expert.
I'm married to an tell you that they're proper experts over there. I will get grilled when I go home, okay? There will be a bottle of Bushmills on the table and there'll be people waiting, okay? And their eyes are too close together and all that sort of stuff.
What was said tonight?
What was said tonight was you can go in your room. I was meant to take my daughter here, who's just come back from college, but the granny put her foot down. And, but anyway, if you look at this, so the other thing is, the liberalism is also interesting. Because what I always find interesting about Northern Ireland is for some people it is as British as Finchley on certain issues. But on gay rights and abortion rights or whatever, it's not. It's a unique place.
Finchley's pretty gay.
What I'm saying is that these changes in the Republic have profound ramifications. Because what's going to be, just to put it in a nutshell, very soon unionists will have to persuade nationalists to vote unionist to save the union. That's it. That's it.
We'll have to persuade Catholics. We'll have to persuade Catholics. Don't make the assumption that Catholic means nationalist or...
No, I understand, but I'm just saying in parentheses, in proxy, right? That's what's going to happen, okay? So therefore, for unionist politicians, the most important thing in the medium term is to make the union an attractive option for Catholics.
Sure.
Okay? Now,
Peter Robinson has said it.
yes. So, but if you go about your business by insulting, demeaning, the opposite, remember I talked about dignity, offering dignity to people. If you decide we're going to insult you, we're going to demean you, we're not going to recognize you, we're going to go backwards, we're also economically going to do something ridiculous called Brexit, which the only option, as I said to unionist friends of mine, that basically ultimately prosperity rather than Protestantism is going to protect the union. So if you decide that you don't want the special status, right? The special status deal in Brexit, the half in, half out, Northern Ireland can trade with the world, it can be a free trading area. What the DUP understands is everybody in the world wants that deal. The whole world wants that deal. And they don't. So that would be great if your people were in the massive majority and you could do what you wanted. But when you're not in the majority, or when you could be in the minority quite soon, it's very interesting for me, William, as, again, a man with a familial interest, if nothing else, that we have arrived at this situation, given what everyone knows about demography, about social change, about economic dynamism, and about electoral choices.
And do I take it that you're going a little bit further than the demographic inevitability argument that we're familiar with, to say those Brexit dynamics are going to accelerate that demographic change?
Brexit makes the union profoundly uninteresting. Let's cut to the chase. It makes it, basically by deciding that their allies are English nationalists, because Brexit is an English nationalist project.
87% of the UK is England.
Yeah, it's an English nationalist project that we know is not that enamoured with this neck of the woods or with Scotland, frankly. By throwing your lot in with English nationalism, it strikes me, and this is in the final chapter of the book, and I'm trying to put everything together, as an unusual option. But the interesting thing is the challenge is not just for unionism. The challenge for nationalism and for the Republic of Ireland and for Northern nationalism is how do you ensure that what could be coming down the line isn't a tribal victory. That you lose, I win. We're going to dominate you now. I think it's really important. I was writing part of this chapter in a little place called Market Hill, County Armagh, just before the 12th. And the banner was urging me to love God, respect the King, and I think be nice to the brethren. It wasn't something that automatically I reacted to positively. But I thought to myself, okay, remember what Mandela did in South Africa? What Mandela did was, the first thing he did is he went to the Afrikaners and he said, you are my people as well. And he put on the rugby shirt and he said, we are going to create something special here. And you didn't lose, just the dynamic changed. And I think this is, again, as somebody who's married into the unionist tribe, as somebody who obviously has spent half my life now amongst people from the unionist tribe, I think it's really important for nationalism to begin to imagine what it's like when you start to understand that the demographic buffer that always guaranteed your position is gone. And that is a huge challenge. And I know in the South, people don't want to talk about it.
Well, let me take you there. I want to go a bit further. Because with the caveat that unionists will dispute any kind of deterministic or inevitability.
Absolutely, and if I were them, I would do so as well.
In there. And a lot
I'm
of
half a unionist,
of course.
The left half.
But let's go with it. Let's go with this analysis. Let's say there's a border poll and you get to that point, one way or the other, where there's a majority here who are sent to reunification.
And it's wafer thin, and it will be wafer thin.
Right, let's just can you imagine the scenario in the south?
Yeah.
Can you imagine a situation where the majority in the north is for reunification and the majority in the south, is against it?
Are you Rory Best or James McLean? Okay. No, I'm really serious. You know, there's the Rory Best approach to the north, where which is one image that Southerners have. I mean, you know all this, and there's the James McLean version. Forget the Kyle Laverty and whatever, right? They're all in the mix too. Okay. The reason that I think it's really important for someone like me, who has a public voice in the South, to write books like this, is to begin to ventilate exactly this idea. What do we do when or if this happens? How do we position ourselves? At the moment, I suspect a huge part, one part of the story of this increasingly better off middle class in the South is that they have a lot to lose commercially from a shock to the system. And how does the whole country prepare itself, even if this were not to happen, but for not the possibility, and this was a remote possibility a while, now we're talking about something that increasingly looks maybe not probable, but certainly 50-50. And I believe that it's absolutely essential to begin these conversations. For example, the other morning I was on with Sean O'Rourke, and you know, as Northerners, there's a deeply, deeply, deeply partitionist mindset in Dublin. And there has been, possibly since the 20s, but certainly since the Troubles. And that is like any sort of groupthink. It needs to be encouraged, it needs to be discussed. I think the New Ireland scenario can not only be a Sinn Féin project. I think if it is only a Sinn Féin project, there will be a lot of resistance from the South. So I think it would be interesting for Sinn Féin to begin the conversation with the other parties, and not say. I also think that it's very important to seek that idea, that sort of almost Mandela-esque notion that you need to make sure that people come with you. It's like everything. Because the scenario that half the people, or 48% of the people, I know you had it in Brexit and they didn't care, don't want this and that's grand and it's majoritarianism. That I don't think is a scenario that anybody wants. But equally,
does that mean you think in any kind of border poll it should be more than 50%?
No, because you can't say a nationalist vote is worth less than a unionist vote. You can't say that. But I think ahead of that, options need to be.
Well, some people have suggested that it should be at 60% or 2/3 majority.
But I would say that's very insulting.
Well,
if I'm a nationalist sitting in Tyrone and I go into the polling station and my mate down the road, Wesley, knows. It's Shamey versus Wesley, right? Shamey goes in and he's got 1 vote and Wesley's got 2.5. It can't work like that. We've been down that road, right? We know where that leads. So it behoves those of us who like to think about these things, even from the altitude of opinion writing, columnists, to try and figure out a way forward.
Is that happening already? We had that big eruptus, the report, Mark Feile, I've done programs with him where he's 1,000 pages, that report, where it's a very detailed analysis of the economics of it. You've got Paul up here who's done his own analysis of some of the economics of it. Is that happening?
I think it's, what has been unusual for me is that I never have been associated with this type of thinking in the South. So I've been very much the middle class economist who talks about the banks and talks about the economy and is kind of very apolitical, never really been associated. But I think it's even more essential because I don't have baggage, or I'm not regarded as being advocating one side or the other. In fact, most others will probably see me a little bit more on the unionist side because of Shan and the family and everything, which to begin the process of articulating these ideas, I think it's really important.
Why do you think during the immigration, you've had a significant increase in immigration since 1990 in the South? We've got zero now immigration in Northern Ireland. What's your explanation for that?
I think that immigrants come to places where they feel that immigration, okay, let's stand back. Immigration is an act of personal transformation. Okay, when you get up and you leave your village in Donegal and you go 100 years ago to Glasgow, that is an act of personal transformation, and it's an incredibly defining act for the person. And we belittle that at our peril. We belittle that at our peril. So immigration, therefore, is the act of somebody who wants to transform herself or himself. One of the most significant choices, William, is where do I go? Where can that transformation be facilitated? And what they do is what we all did, is you talk to your mates. The immigration is really interesting. In the days of mobile phones, right, and WhatsApp, immigration is a WhatsApp phenomenon. I know that sounds unusual, but just think about it. You're a Polish lad sitting in Warsaw. Your mate in Dublin says, look, there's 5 jobs going. The geezer says, come on Monday, you can sleep on my floor, let's go for it. And the lads are over on Ryanair, right? It's right. So why it doesn't happen here is obviously, and this comes back to my point about the economic dynamism, that if the economy is not dynamic, immigrants don't come. And if they feel that the political leadership is at best ambivalent to their presence by siding with an explicitly anti-immigrant project like Brexit, driven by a fear of immigration, if you're sitting in, I use Poland in parentheses, if you're sitting in Poland, it's not an attractive option. So I come back to the idea that immigrants, no more than the Irish immigration to the United States enriched the United States. Also, interestingly, the first nativist movement was a movement called the Know Nothings. And the Know Nothings were so called because when they were asked what they knew about this movement, they said, I know nothing. And they started in Philadelphia, in New York, and in Boston between 1851 and 1854. And they were a Protestant American nativist movement that feared Irish and German Catholics. Okay? Irish people don't like to put the German in because we like to be more narcissistic. It was all about us. It wasn't. They didn't like the Germans either. And the Know Nothings campaigned on the idea that opening borders in the United States was wrong. And it was only when Irish soldiers fought heroically in the Civil War in the 1860s. There's an amazing book, if you want to read it, it's called by Noel Ignatieff, and it's a brilliant title. It's called How the Irish Became White. Okay? And it's about the history of Irish immigration. And the reason I use it is because this is part of our backstory. It's part of the Ulster Scots backstory too. There's all this stuff. So immigration to me is a barometer that something good is happening in the local neck of the woods.
And it is interesting that we tell very positive stories about immigration or emigration from here to other parts of the world, whereas often the same people can problematise migration to this part of the world. I went to New Zealand to do a documentary, and there were so many northern Protestants who moved to New Zealand that for a decade in the late 19th century, the North Island of New Zealand was called New Ulster. That was the official government name of the North Island.
Absolutely shocking.
That's extraordinary, isn't it?
And put the fear of God into it. No, but it is, that's why the white All Blacks all look like Billy Joe McBride. They do.
We're slipping into mythology.
But also just one last thing on immigration.
All right, then
immigration is very different in its impact on different classes. If you're middle class, immigration is overwhelmingly positive because you don't compete with immigrants in the market for health, in the market for education, your kids' schools, health, jobs, all that. If you're working class, the relationship with immigration can be different, but it is only usually different if it is stoked up by somebody and the evident potential conflicts are exacerbated by deliberate political antagonism.
David McWilliams. I promised David McWilliams, the author of Renaissance Nation, that I would mention his book at least 3 times this evening. David McWilliams, the author of Renaissance
Christmas present.
Nation,
Amazing Christmas
and he will be signing and indeed selling in his liberal economic way, selling copies of this book tonight. Now, over to you. Do we have mics around the room? We do. We have mics around the room. Let's take it. Should we alternate sort of left and right? Let's try it that way. Who wants to go first? Right down here. Gentleman here. Anybody over there? We'll try and get the mic to you as quickly as we can. Share the mic. Show spatial solidarity with that microphone. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Patrick McKeever. Very interesting talk, and in many ways it reinforces a lot of the general feedback that people are trying to tune into. Is reinforcing and just endorsing that. You talked about the difference in the strength of the northern economy and the power of the northern economy vis-a-vis the south. You also talked about the transformational stage in about the 90s, and you mentioned Mary Robinson. Would you not say that also with that change and the advent and growth of the internet, the changing understanding of culture, what we mean by culture in the 21st century, the growth of tourism, that is very much part of that, would you not say at that time we also had a newfound identity in Ireland with modern Irish expression? For example, the U2 with Riverdance and things like that. Mm-hmm. So the idea of a more modern understanding of Irish expression of culture, it goes beyond traditional music, singing and dancing. So it's a more I would be interested to know, as an economist and a specialist, as you understand the northern problem, and you also talked about the moving the in the north, moving the Protestant Unionist Loyalist community with us into the south. How much do you think the culture and a changing difference in understanding of unionist and particularly loyalist culture, how much do you think that was changed to have a more expansive view? How much do you think that would impact on tourism on the island as a whole, even if we retain the union?
Yep. So I think it's
two questions.
It's a very, very good question. It's about the general question, so about the impact of culture on economics. I think that culture is absolutely essential for the economy to grow. And by that I mean the broad embracing of cultural phenomena. Because what's really interesting is we're going into an economy now which I would call capitalism without capital. It's a very different, when in the old days, if you wanted a big industry here, you had to Harland Wolff, you had to fellas building cranes, you had to have a lot of bread, a lot of capital. But you look at all the new industries that have built up in the last 10 years, none of them needed anything like the capital that we needed in the old days. So the economy has become very light in terms of the requirements of capital, but what it requires is human capital, not financial capital. And the human capital piece is the culture. So for example, it is very clear to me that the increasing tolerance of the Republic of Ireland has had a dramatic impact in the quality of the type of people who want to come to Ireland and who want to invest in Ireland. We would not have Facebook or Google or any of those without a variety of factors, one of which is
corporation tax.
Corporation tax, yeah, but again, Estonia has lower corporation tax than Ireland. Bulgaria has lower corporation tax. They have zero corporation tax. The reason Facebook isn't in Bulgaria is they don't want to go there. It's not If it was a matter of engineering corporation tax, the rest of the world would have A, done it, and B, would have profited from it. It's actually a myriad of factors, right? And I think it's shorthand. It's a myriad of factors. The biggest impediment to the South now is housing, because the people can't get houses at the right price. And unless we fix this, and fix it quickly, we are going to go backwards. So the first thing, I think you're right about culture. Regarding, I'm no expert on loyalism, although I can see Ballybean from the bedroom tonight, but I won't be going, okay? Look, I think that what strikes me as a Southerner, I was very interested in going to, the book takes you to places that most Southerners don't go. And I go down the Ards Peninsula to some of the more loyal fishing villages. I go into council estates in Cookstown. I go to Armagh. And I watch loyalism in the week or two before the 12th. And I listen, of course, to some relations who are more rural, Portland-owned farmer, Orangeman. And I drink Schlur with them. I've noticed actually what brings all of Northern Ireland together is Schlur, heavy metal, motorbikes and stiff little fingers. Once you get that, you're fine. I wouldn't be an expert on it, but I think that it's very important to understand people's anxieties. Somebody said that the role of political leadership is to understand the anxiety of the people and do something about it. And I think that's very opposite for here.
What do you understand about loyalism in terms of economic activity, creativity, intellectual activity?
What I understand is that nobody is special. So everything that has happened in places that are successful can be replicated everywhere else. That nobody is special. And this idea that an entire group are in some way beyond this conversation is wrong.
Can't be beyond.
Can't be beyond this conversation, have to be part of it. But what you do realise, if you look at the British state, okay, from an economic perspective, is that the regions have done really badly. The over-centralisation around London has had profound effects on the dependency of Scotland, of Wales, of Northern Ireland. Places that were self-starting, particularly Scotland. If you imagine Scotland was a self-starting, incredibly innovative place in the late Victorian, early Edwardian eras. It is now not. It is now heavily dependent. And I think that as long as you overly subsidize a region and do not impose a real budget constraint, it's easier for the region to slip behind. And I think that is one problem that I see all over the UK. You see it in Wales as well, that you create supplicant regions rather than innovative regions. And that can cause irreparable economic damage. And one of the processes of this conversation is to repair that.
Let me come to this side of the room. I'm expecting an explosion of rhetorical activity in this room. What are you doing to me? Come on, get those hands in the air. Thank you. We'll alternate. Yes, go to you next.
Egan Boyle here.
Where are you?
Yeah.
How's it going?
Exactly.
I've two questions. One is on economics. We have a very youthful population here who are economically inactive. They're out of school at a very young age, not able, but no qualifications and no employment for them. How do we address that? And the second part of that is the youth suicide rate, which we have here, which is phenomenal. I think that if people had work to go to and need to get up in the morning and respect it and encourage, I think that suicide rate would shrink considerably. But I think there's just young people come forward just seem to have no sense of purpose and they're in a scrap at a very
I
young
think
age.
the economic inactivity rate, what, 30%? It's the
Yeah,
highest in the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We often talk about a low unemployment rate, but the economic activity rate is very high.
Yeah, I mean, the North has got some very odd statistics, like you have both the highest percentage of overachievers in education and underachievers. So it's there's a lot. The one thing I'll just say to you is, I was brought up studying economics. I worked in the Irish Central Bank. You know, the sort of if there is a nerve centre of economics in the country, it's there. And when I was there, repeatedly I heard this expression called creating a job. We have to create jobs. And I used to think that that's the way the economy worked until I got a wee bit older. And now I realise that you can't, nobody creates jobs. You create a demand for a product that sells, and when it sells, you need to employ people to make it. Okay? So the idea that somebody can wave a magic wand, particularly the state, and create jobs seems to me to be a fallacy, because normally if jobs are created by the state, you get into this dilemma of networks and preferences and access and credentialism, okay? So one of the things that I think has happened in the South, maybe because a lot of us came back from the States over the years or whatever, is that the language around economics has changed a bit. That for younger people, it's not conceivable that jobs will be created for them in the future. That they will have to create their own jobs. And this presents a massive challenge to the education system, because the education system here rewards the type of brain that can pass exams. We have turned into a nation of exam passers. I call it in the book a testocracy. You're run by people who are good at tests. And as you get older, you realise that there are hundreds of types of intelligence. But only one type of intelligence is rewarded in school, which is the linear brain that can absorb the information, put it in here in the can, and then screeve like bejesus during exam. This is my multilingual approach, okay? Now, that means that, think about those kids who are leaving. The education system rewards a certain type of brain, but it actually punishes the other brains. It humiliates these kids. My daughter is dyslexic. Every single day of every single week in school, she endured tiny moments of personal humiliation. She was lucky that she came from a middle-class family with a father and mother who could understand this. Think about the amount of working-class kids. I'm thinking of the guys I was in national school with together who just couldn't get it. So your question is not just economics, it's a very deep question about what we value in children and how we educate people and how we orientate our education system to try and make sure that as many kids as possible, remember I talked at the beginning about kids having dreams, that as many kids as possible feel that they have permission to have those dreams.
Thank you, Declan. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is John McWilliams. In the late 80s and early 90s, I lived in Germany during the fall of the wall and reunification. And the picture you paint there, David, about 20 years into the future, in some ways reminds me of my experience then, where you had a wealthy West with a large middle class, an underdeveloped East, and I suppose the sense of one nation ultimately drove the reunification, despite the fact that the wealthy people in the West, did that with some reluctance because they felt they were paying for those in the East. So I suppose my question is, do you think there are any parallels or lessons to be learned from that? Do you think that sense of one nation might be the ultimate driver, or do you think Northern Ireland could end up, as you described it in your article in the Financial Times, as the child in the divorce where neither parent wanted to have the kids?
I think it was more I think it was more of a foster child. Well, I mean, again, I come back to the idea that nobody's special. That we know what makes economies grow. For example, if Northern Ireland goes down this route of Brexit and no deal and yada yada yada, you take away the possibility of encouraging massive investment in here, which seems to me to be in nobody's interest. The East German example is very interesting because the East German example was initially defined by massive fiscal transfer from west to east. Lots of people who were very skeptical about it trumpeted the fact that it took West Germany about 15 or 16 years to absorb it, but absorb it they did. And now the German entity is incredibly strong. However, what is interesting, if you look at the areas where the ADF are strongest, they are in the former East Germany. If you look at the areas where Die Linke, the extreme left party, are focused in the former East Germany. So it takes a long time. But I don't see it like this. I just think that the north of this country is bubbling with opportunity. And people just need to be liberated to believe in themselves. You know, this notion that what happened in the south, where a country goes from being incredibly poor to actually quite rich, can happen here as well. You just need to understand the process whereby economics clicks.
But that's not going to be a new subvention relationship.
No.
Or
The subvention makes you poor. It's a strange thing to say. You don't get rich by building leisure centres with other people's money. Okay? That's nonsense. That's killing home rule with kindness. We've been there before. You get rich by people taking what Nassim Taleb, the American philosopher, calls having skin in the game, having actually responsibility, getting up in the morning and going out and creating something that wasn't there. This is innovation is really interesting. When innovation is about creating something today that wasn't there yesterday. You don't get that from excessive subvention. Excessive subvention gives you the illusion of wealth, gives you the illusion of prosperity, but to use the thought process, that is a prosperity that is rented, not earned. You've got to earn it. And there's no reason to believe that this part of the country can't earn it.
yeah, and on this side of the yes, run back there. Let's get a mic to you. Or have you got someone with
Gentleman with the blue jumper,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Is anyone done that?
Yeah, in the aisle.
Let's give the mic to somebody. Yeah.
It's like being in school when you broke the hand, you broke the law, and
Hand
then
on
they
the
shake,
mic.
he's not
Hand
going
on
to
the mic. Fantastic. The Jamie Dornan look-alike. Yes, him. Now they're all staring at you. Yes.
50 Shades of
Big
Green.
man.
I really enjoyed the book. I have it on Kindle, so don't need to buy another copy. Just to get.
Sorry, I don't recognise that particular. Where are you? I can't see you. Okay, come on. Well, thank you very much. Thanks very much.
He does look like Jamie Dornan, doesn't he?
He does?
Yeah.
Harrington or something. I have a question regards the protectionist mindset.
Yes.
I hope you don't think this is very cheeky, but in the last chapter of the book, there was a reference to the warped campaign of the IRA, and it was off the back of Articles 2 and 3 of the Constitution. And I'll say, with all respect, the Republic wasn't founded in peaceful protest, you know.
Fair point.
And there might, if there's a wee bit of cognitive dissonance in a great thinker like yourself, what does that not say about the protectionist mindset on the whole? Do you know what I mean? I mean, we didn't articulate that just right, but do you know what I mean?
No, it's a very fair question. I don't know where you want me to start. I don't know how long you have. And you don't think I'm going to come in to the Falls Road, start lecturing you lads about political strategies, okay? But
Don't worry, I got the camera on, don't you?
I actually believe it was warped. And I'm not sure it advanced the underlying cause. And that's my own personal view.
What do you think was the effect economically in terms of where we
Well,
could have been?
yeah, no, I take your point. And it's usually, you know, your opinions tend typically to be grounded from where you started. Okay, so this is not about reassessing things, but obviously economically, the troubles, bombing, counter troubles, counter reaction, the entire thing, it knocked the North back a generation or two. It's so obvious. Now, what has been interesting is the recovery has been really quite strong, and it's quite evident. I don't think that anyone can underestimate how significant and long-lasting the impression was for the rest of the world. And I think that now what makes countries and societies not just wealthy but inclusive is being part of the global economy. And I think it's very important in the context of economics to present an offering, if you want to use the economic terms, that is secure, safe. And I think against that background, we'd all agree that it's not the best way to expand the economy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No, thank you, absolutely. Thank you.
We're going to alternate, yes. Let's get the mic to you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And by the way, on the partitionist mindset, I think it really firmed up partition, actually.
As we say in this part of the world, we are sucking diesel now.
No, I'm just sweating now. It's totally different. Let me talk about, philosophy and medieval things.
Let me bring you back to your
head.
Let me bring you back to
Exactly, I was about to run out the door there.
Someone's going to bring up Desmond analogies in a moment and catch you on that. Go right ahead.
My name is Frank Costello. I do not look like Jimmy Doran. To give you a very quick report to yourself to David that Joe's American Bar is still on Newbury Street. It just moved 2 blocks away. My son's working in Boston.
No, really?
But I'm 20 years in Belfast, from that part of the world.
That's crazy.
That's the bar.
I
toiled in.
4 kids here, 1 County Clare wife, but we're doing well in Belfast. But with respect to Southeast Galway, it was part of my own life experience in going to school in St. Mary's in the early 70s. And one of those, I'm on Exhibit A of that, and many of my friends ended up working in Boston Scientific, and companies like Wang no longer exist, but would start their own companies. But part of that, speaking, whatever your view again is about Lamass and Whitaker and so forth, but tell us this report around that time of restructuring investment. And from the EU came the whole question of a software directory for Ireland that was targeted European ads. But those things made a difference of not having subvention, but creating wealth, and that government intervention was of stimulating the private economy. It's 16% now in the public sector. Here it's much different than 16%, but how you break that stranglehold, and that's what was happening before Brexit, bit by bit. But Andrew Technology was a company right here, still is in West Belfast, producing scientific products for the wider world with money from the European Investment Bank matching US pension funds. So I know a small bit about that, but you can just speak to that bit about those things where that partnership with government does work. Maybe it's that the corporation tax is the ultimate answer, but by God it does help. And having a playing field, the Brexit madness has really shuffled the deck in the wrong direction. But just
I think
you take that
again, thank you very much for identifying Joe's American Bar and Grill. It's my last proper job as a dishwasher there. I think what I'm always interested in economics is to see all the things you've said. European Union, the corporation tax, the level of this, all joined the European Union in and around the same time. We did. We joined in 73, they joined in 1980-81. For a variety of reasons, Spain and Portugal, because they had, actually the three of them had to come out of right-wing dictatorships and really needed an anchor of various different profundities and nastiness. But what interests me is, why did Ireland grow so much more than them? That's what I'm interested in. And because we all have these conditions, and I wouldn't underestimate the American influence, I wouldn't underestimate the diaspora, I wouldn't underestimate the power of Irish America in nudging things along. Many years ago, I sat up on a discussion like this with Jack Welch, who was the head of GE, and I asked him just in passing, I said, did it make a difference that your grandparents were from Cork? that you decided to put GE in Ireland? And he said, damn sure it did. It made a huge difference. He said, because my choice was the same offering was in France, the same offering was somewhere in Central Europe, and he said, I'm Irish. So there's a lot of unique factors which are historical legacies, which the interesting thing is, what changes people's minds when they have a 50-50 decision to make? And if we in Ireland can even influence a tiny amount of those 50-50 decisions, whether it's cultural, emotional, historical, any of those reasons, then we have a really good chance. And I think these rather ephemeral ideas are really important to absorb. That Ireland has an incredibly strong place in the minds of the globe. We are liked, we have connections. These, what they call soft power. You know the difference between hard power and soft power? In the old days, hard power. So like Britain had a hard power, the big navy kick lumps out of you and robbed your country. That's fair enough, right? That's hard, yeah. Right, that's what you do when you're a big. Russia does it, Americans. And then you have this really interesting thing, which soft power, which is the power of the imagination,
We sent
the
Bono.
power of France. Bono is an extremely important individual in this process, actually. Extremely important individual. But soft power is the power of persuasion. And that's essential for a country.
I'm conscious that I probably have 10 people. Listen, I'm going all right. I'm loving this. It's great. You're a great audience, but I'm conscious I need to get you home at some point. So we'll do shortish questions and shortish answers, and we'll see how many we get through. All right. The microphone's down the back. Yes, go right ahead. It's Eamon Malley. This is dangerous, giving him a microphone.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, William. My sense of the unionist population right here at the moment is, David, that the threat of the so-called backstop amounts to fear within unionism that their parity of esteem is being diminished in terms of equality with the rest of the UK. Do you think that a new Ireland can be realised, and it could be happening more quickly than even your analysis suggests? Do you think that London of necessity has to be involved in those forward planning discussions with every party on this island to realise the change? And particularly, do you think that Ireland would need financial support from England to realise that new Ireland?
Okay, I mean, I think London is the partner in this discussion. So there's like, the Good Friday Agreement really put it all together. You know, it's in place, the north-south, the east-west, the Dublin-London, I mean, it's all there. If you could just get the thing up and running again, which is a different discussion, okay? But it's very, very clear that discussions with London and London to Dublin are absolutely crucial. I would be surprised if they're not going on, at least in some tangential way. What was really unfortunate about Brexit, one of the many unfortunate things, one of these is that, you know, mates of mine who worked in the Department of Foreign Affairs said that they'd regularly go to Brussels and they go for pints with the English fellas and watch football with them. So the English, there'd be Man United fans, they'd go with the German fella and the Dutch fella and the Spanish girl or whatever, and in actual fact, the Irish delegation, the English delegation would go and have a few jars where they knew each other, they chat, they knew each other's families. So that's a very important part of the soft power. But in a nutshell, because William's looking at me here nervously, I think that yes, there will be a bill, and I think it'll be ongoing, and I think that this process, this new Ireland process, is something that we should not put, to use the backstop terminology, a time limit on. It could be open-ended for a long time, so as to try and bring as many people into the centre as possible.
Thank you very much. Have you got a mic? Yes? Chris is trying to jump in.
Chris Donnelly.
How are you doing, Chris?
I just want to ask a question, but before, I think just in relation to your comment about the IRA campaign, there were many terrible things happened during the Troubles here, awful things that couldn't be excused, but I think the enduring legacy of the IRA campaign, looking back, is going to be that it destroyed the unionist veto. And I think that
Unionist
veto.
Veto.
And I think that Southern and this predated partition, that southern political commentators, even to the modern day politicians, fail to understand the vice-like grip that unionism had within the northern state of society, private sector, public sector, all throughout. And we wouldn't be at the point of parity of esteem and moving towards a living parity of esteem where we can actually credibly say we're moving towards United Ireland unless that unionist veto had been removed. And I think, but that's in the past. I think what I'm interested in one point is, you talked earlier, you almost identified certain political developments, landmark developments like Mary Robinson's presidential election victory in 1990, and those, victories for liberalism and constitutional amendments in recent years, whether it's on same-sex marriage or repeal, as the outward manifestation of the liberal, dignifying Ireland. And I'm intrigued by that. If we're coming from the northern point of view, of those people who are interested in moving towards United Ireland, I'm just wondering what significance you would put on the presidential election referendum that's coming up soon, in terms of people from the north as well as the diaspora being able to vote for the Irish president. And I think why I'm saying that is, you mentioned earlier about this idea of the analogy of the skin in the game. From the north, we have often looked at Leo Varadkar and other southern politicians when they talk about wearing a green jersey. It's, for our perspective, it's a 26 county green jersey they're wearing, not a 32 county green jersey. Yep. And where the skin in the game comes into it is if a Fine Gael, a Fine Gael, an Irish Labour Party candidate is having to run in a presidential election, which includes a franchise which is in the northern 6 counties. Well, they've skin in the game. They have to organise. They have to come north. They have to listen. They have to bring their vocabulary. In other words, they're incentivised to no longer think 26, but to begin thinking 32. And I'm just wondering what significance you would put on that as maybe a landmark political development.
You just answered the question as you asked it, but we'll get another answer.
I can't wait until people here have a vote in the presidential election. I think it's absolutely essential as part of this process that people in north of Ireland, the 6 counties, Northern Ireland, whatever you want to call it, whatever you feel most comfortable with, have a say in the president of this island. And I think it will actually change the dynamic quite a bit. I think it will change things. I think you shouldn't underestimate how little southern politicians know about this part of the world.
And bear in mind, you've got a unionist senator as well now.
Yeah, and I think that, it could have a really significant positive impact. But like a lot of positive things, Chris, I'm not sure it'll be really straightforward. I think it'll be quite unusual, but I think all these processes which wrap your arms more widely about more people are positive. And this is one of those steps.
Have we got another question? Oh, now you. Right, let's go to the mics. Why don't you make a decision? I don't want to. Somebody near the mic. Go for it. On this side, yeah.
We've got one short.
Hold on.
The man with the mic stands
It's working on that. Right, okay. Well,
Two mics.
first of all,
we've got two. I'll give you a second, yeah.
How you doing? How's it going?
Yeah, fine,
Got
thanks.
2 mics.
I would just like to commend you for your presentation tonight, and I would like specifically to ask you, because you've written extensively on this question of economic reunification and the economics of the island. And but before I do that, I'd just like to say, when you talk about the transformation that you've lived through in the south, we have lived through an equal transformation here in the north, created by Republicans, people like Martin McGuinness and Jerry Adams and others, and the peace process working in conjunction with the unionists. So I think when you're making a national or a presentation in terms of transformational events, the north is being transformed, the island is being transformed as a result of the peace process. But that to one side now, because I'm keen if you would speak about what you've written about extensively on the questions around economic reunification, and specifically you asked the question, how does the country prepare itself in answer to the question from William about a border poll? Well, I would suggest to you that perhaps one of the ways in which people can reach out to each other is to generate this economic debate on reunification, an all-Ireland economy, moving from 2 economies to 1 economy. So I'd be keen to hear from you what steps you think can be taken
in relation to moving from where we are now from 2 states, 2 economies, to a single economy.
Thank you very much. And if you do that for 45
I
seconds.
think you should, like myself, all be forced to marry each other and start. Sleeping with each other really helps. You get to know each other, having children, making choices about schools and all those great things where culture comes back. No, I think it's my sense is that the beginning of all these processes happen with people talking. Never underestimate the power of conversations, where you begin to start to trust the other person. And that starts between republicanism and the South. I'm not talking about unionism. I'm talking about within our own broad tribe, okay? With all its various incarnations and schisms, and that it goes to what Chris is talking about. We need to talk to each other first. And we're not talking to each other. And once you start talking, you realize that you've so much more in common than you have that divides you.
Can I just follow up on this, because I know you don't like subventions. You think that is not the way to go. But certainly when
I buy one for myself.
When I've been involved in these public conversations about economic unity, often what people will describe is maybe over a 15 or 20-year period, you have a UK pay down from the 10 or 12 billion at the minute being transferred from London to Northern Ireland, and you have a Dublin pay up over the same period of time, and then you might have a European Union injection pay in over a period of time, plus attracting more multinationals and spreading some of this wealth around the island. But that looks like a kind of a new version of subvention, doesn't it?
Well, at the moment, what we need to get to a situation is that there can't be a massive economic shock to living standards. That is inconceivable. The beautiful thing about the international bond market is that it works, that there's no shortage of money in the world. There's no shortage of money in the world at all. In actual fact, you can argue one of the dilemmas of the world is too much money knocking around. And I think that if you follow the German model of unification, the Germans issued these unification bonds, which were 30-year bonds with very low coupons, and they financed things very easily. So don't underestimate what we have to sell. Sometimes we haven't got, it's like what my granny used to have, a good room. Did your granny ever have a good room? Right? My granny had a good room, it was so good I wasn't good enough to go into it.
We only had one room in our house.
Right. Yeah, right. Okay. But
I wasn't brought up in Dalkey, I was brought up in McWilliams.
Now, don't get all classist on me. Don't get all bleeding classist on me, right? But my point is that sometimes the good room of my granny used to have a good room because she didn't feel socially as good as the good people in the village, right? And when the good people came in, even her accent changed. She was like the telephone accent, right? All that thing, right? She was from West Cork, she had a great accent, like, come here, Leno, one chan, normally Leno. And then she sounded like a cross between, I don't know, the Queen Mother and Margie Morrissey. It was shocking to carry on, right? But my point is, don't underestimate how good, interesting